Good evening, everybody, and thank you very much for your patience. I'm very pleased to be speaking to you today, and actually speaking to you about this subject, because it's a very sweet relief from my usual subjects that I tend to talk about, given my role. And I'm going to talk to you today about why Streatham would survive the apocalypse. Strange title, it seems, but I'm going to explain to you why we've got to this point. Now, as a fan of apocalyptic movies and TV shows myself, I find myself thinking about what actions I would take if I was faced with an end-of-life type of event. And as you can imagine, your mind would usually revert to what happens in the movies, where you can gather resources from, how quickly you can get to family and loved ones. I can't drive. Well, I don't have a license. Actually, I can't drive. So how would you get away from the disaster, assuming that it's concentrated in one place, and what would I need to survive? But as I was thinking about this, talking about what I would do in this instance, one thought that kept reoccurring to me was that here in my constituency of Streatham, which, and you'll find out why I say this, includes Brixton Hill, Tulse Hill and Clapham Common, here in this constituency, we have absolutely everything we need to survive, because Streatham is obviously the best place on planet Earth. Now, of course, there are some apocalypse events that would be incredibly difficult to survive, nuclear warfare, more serious, or a zombie apocalypse, if such a thing was possible. And I would also advise, it's my disclaimer, against taking my words as a genuine survival guide in these events. This is more of an appreciation of Streatham and its many virtues. Now, my thoughts on survival are more for an event along the lines of another Y2K or 2012, when the Mayans said everything would go, or perhaps more realistically, how Streatham might cope in the worst case scenarios of a climate breakdown. Before I lay out this plan for our survival, it would only be right to lay out the likelihood of an end-of-world event. So unfortunately, this is going to get a little gloomy for a little bit, but you can't really have a talk about the apocalypse survival plan without an actual apocalypse. So I'm going to have to ask you to bear with me. Now, the chances of a climate apocalypse and how it would impact Streatham. I think the first thing to say is that fortunately Streatham is very unlikely to be the epicenter of any climate-related apocalypse, so we're all safe. Of course, that doesn't mean that we can be complacent. Did this change to the next slide? Oh, fantastic, it works. So London is already vulnerable to extreme weather in the form of floods, droughts, heat waves, and very cold weather. Further to this climate change, London's population growth and other changes, such as the makeup of London's population and land cover, are liable to increase the risk of severe impacts. This map from Climate Central caused waves when it was circulated on social media. It suggests that on its current progress, we're on 3.5 degrees of warming, the Thames would be lapping at the shores of central Brixton by the middle of the century. Luckily, the constituency starts at Brixton Hill and it starts to go up, so we're fine. Now, there's a small problem with this map. When you look at the small print, you can see that it doesn't take account of coastal engineering, in other words, the flood defences that we have. Maybe a more important question is how well London's Thames barrier will withstand rising sea levels, more extreme rainfalls, and increased river flow. And the answer to that depends very much on how well all of this is maintained. Now, in 2014, the Environment Agency estimated that the cost of maintaining the defences until 2035 would be around £1.5 billion, with an additional £1.8 billion needed to repair and upgrade the defences until 2050. So imagine a world where that investment failed to find its way into the project because we have a government that doesn't believe in long-term public sector investments. Of course, we already know that without the barrier, iconic landmarks like Tower Bridge, the O2 Arena, maybe there's some people that wouldn't be so sad about this, and the Houses of Parliament, maybe even more people would be less sad about that, would end up being submerged in floodwater. Or a world in which the Environment Agency staff who operate the Thames barrier go on strike. Imagine if it became such an intractable dispute that these workers simply stopped showing up. The scientific consensus is that this kind of extremes that we saw this winter and last summer in the UK are going to become even more commonplace. We've all seen how society grinds to a halt whenever there's a couple of inches of snow, in London in particular, let alone a sudden heat wave. Now, Streatham, however, you're all in luck, is going to be pretty safe due to its relative elevation, but with our ailing pipe network and increasing temperatures, we're likely to see flooding more often. So, imagine a world where Thames Water somehow inexplicably gets to keep its monopoly, hiking bills up every year, slowly siphoning off money towards shareholders at the expense of our water network. And imagine a world where pipes are bursting so frequently that the under-resourced teams working for Thames Water barely have started one set of repairs when the next one appears, like a whack-a-mole, but obviously with leaks. All of these things will put a severe strain on our society and our infrastructure. With the interplay between these different strains, who knows what will happen? So here's the hypothetical scenario. Let's imagine we're faced with an end-of-life event, maybe nothing quite like a nuclear disaster or a zombie apocalypse. But let's assume something catastrophic has occurred and climate breakdown has sped up drastically, bringing about the end of the world as we know it. Global society as we know it has broken down, world governments have collapsed, the formal structures that we live by have, for all intents and purposes, failed. The people of Streatham have been left to fend for ourselves, so what do we do? Now, in most apocalyptic movies, the aim always seems to be to get out of the city and head to the coast or to the countryside. For people living in other parts of London, this might be advisable. But for us here in Streatham, because we live in a fantastic place, we have everything we need to ensure that we can survive the apocalypse. So Streatham's survival guide starts, and I have to start again with a disclaimer. I am by no means a survival expert or a doomsday enthusiast who has stress tested this plan in any way. I'm just a Streatham enthusiast. And this is by no means a foolproof means. And if you do find yourself in an apocalyptic event, please follow any national, regional or local guidance that is provided before following any aspect of what I'm going to say to you today. In order to survive the apocalypse, we must establish 4 key things. Still in the right place. Shelter, fresh water, existing food stock, and maintaining long sustenance and recreating thriving communities. We in Streatham are fortunate to have access to all of these things. So let's start with shelter. Establishing a safe place to rest and keep warm will be crucial, particularly in the event of unusual weather patterns. So going back to that climate central map, which predicts that much of London could be underwater in the 22nd century, with parts of South London, including the northern parts of Lambeth, underwater or regularly flooded by 2030. While this is really worrying, for other parts of London in particular, we in Streatham can have relative peace of mind knowing that our flood risk is low. The upper part of Streatham Common has heights between 75 and 85 metres above sea level. The lower parts of the common falls to 45 metres above sea level at its lowest point, and the average elevation for the rest of the area is approximately 57 metres above sea level, so we are all good. It's also likely that the national grid will be down, and although there are a number of homes with individual solar panels, many homes are going to be left without gas and electricity, so people need to group together for their accommodation. Fortunately, in Streatham, we have a number of venues with high capacity to house a large number of residents, most of which also have a kitchen area, which is, of course, the most important. We have 40 religious buildings, over 50 primary and secondary school buildings, a number of community halls, a range of large venues that can accommodate large numbers. So we've got the Odeon Cinema, the Bingo Hall, several gyms, and a leisure centre. And people can get themselves to one of these venues to unite with local residents. Banding together really increases your chances of survival. And as previously stated, there is a high chance that the national grid will be down, so we need to establish ways of generating energy. In Streatham, we have a considerable number of engineers, skilled trainers, plumbers, electricians, and other professional labourers living in the constituency, which will be perfect for the solar panel farm, which can be established along the hill of Streatham Common. And while cloudy skies present an issue, because we live in England, being on the hillside will allow us to more easily angle the panels to the sun evenly. Where else in the country do you find this? There's also limited risk of flooding, even in wetter conditions, if we were expected to experience this in some sort of climate crisis. So, Acting as a centralised energy source, the energy generated from the solar farm can be harvested and dispersed to centralised accommodations that I mentioned previously. So in the event of an apocalyptic disaster, Streatham has ample space to provide sufficient centralised shelter for the people of Streatham. Now on to fresh water. Yes, that is the right one. Fresh water is crucial to survival, and as we know, you can only survive for about 3 days without water, so establishing a sufficient clean water supply is crucial if we are to survive. Now, if anybody was thinking of changing the profession, if there was a true apocalyptic event, the first group of people that they would look for was water hygienists, then the royal family. So if you're looking for a new profession and you wanted to make sure you got on that ark or whatever it is they're carrying off into a spaceship, you might want to think about that. They are people that can clean our water are the most important. But luckily for us, we don't need that specialism because the answer lies in Streatham Common. In 1659, natural mineral springs were discovered in Streatham Common, producing water that boasted to have 3 times the mineral content of Epsom's and some miraculous medical qualities. Ooh. Streatham Pumping Station, which is located on Conyers Road, was actually built to extract the water, and at its height of production, it was able to produce 2 million gallons of water from the well on a daily basis. Whilst all of that yield has since deteriorated to the extent that it's no longer really economically viable to use as a supply source today, in the event of an apocalypse, the Streatham Pumping Station could be a sufficient source of water for people in Streatham. Streatham is also graced with a source of natural flowing water from the River Graveney, which flows from Tooting through to Streatham and right up to Norbury. And whilst most of Streatham's section of the river is underground, there are sections of the river that are accessible and could be used as water sourcing points. The River Graveney is a tributary of the River Wandle, a chalk river which has a reputation for pure, clean water that is also an ideal habitat for a variety of different fish and plants for the pescatarians amongst you. And unfortunately, due to a lot of fly tipping we're seeing at the moment and sewage pollution in the River Wandle and the River Graveney, it's not advisable to drink the water from the Graveney River in particular. However, in a post-apocalyptic world, this is unlikely to be a problem, and concerted efforts to clean and maintain the river could make this viable and a fresh water source for the people of Streatham. And it's absolutely worth noting as well that there are loads of ponds across Streatham. Whilst they're not drinkable, they can definitely be used for sanitation purposes. Existing food stock. Once shelter and water are established, the next step will be to secure our current stock of food. Of course, there will be an initial scramble to raid our various supermarkets. I expect this Tesco's to be empty, and shops, for any food supplies. And it's a classic movie scheme that makes total sense. And here in Streatham, we have an abundance of supermarkets. In fact, we had the first supermarket, so we know how it's done. And a load of shops that will hopefully keep people's stomachs full. We even have a good place to store them. Mainly, we have the ice rink, which could count as a large refrigerator, which would allow us to store goods for a long period of time, provided we can keep it powered. And I'm going to come on to our solar panels again. Now, supermarkets and shops would certainly be a good place to start, but once we've used up all of the stuff in Tesco's and Sainsbury's and Co-op, we're going to need to get creative. And in Streatham, there are actually a number of locally sourced and produced goods that can help sustain us in the short term and give us the tools to produce the food and goods that we need in the long run. And that's why this table over here is filled with food. Now, Suzanne, my office manager, who is my lovely assistant for today, is going to be handing you around some of the things that we locally source in Streatham that could help all of you survive the apocalypse when it comes. Now, we're going to start with the bread. As I said, Brixton Hill is still in the Streatham constituency, and the flooding would only come up to the bottom, the centre of Brixton. So we still would have the Brixton Windmill in our domain. Now, the Brixton Windmill was built in 1816 by the Ashby family, and they produced flour until 1934, and it was restored to working order in 2011, and it's the only surviving windmill in inner London. And when it was first built, The surrounding area of Brixton was all open fields, and it was only in the 1850s that the area around the mill became built up, blocking the strong winds needed to drive the sails of the mill, causing the Ashby family to move their milling to Mitcham and remove the sails from most of the machinery in the Brixton mill. Now, in 1902, the mill was actually refitted with an ironclad modular mill driven by steam, and we'll get onto steam power later as well, though it was subsequently closed in the 1930s. The Brixton windmill survived World War II, and in 1951 it was listed as a Grade 2 building. So in 2003, the Friends of the Windmill Gardens was established with the aim of restoring and reopening the mill. And with the aid of a grant from the Heritage Lottery Fund, restoration began in 2010. And in 2011, the mill became fully operational, and you can now purchase Brixton milled flour from the mill. In fact, during the pandemic, they were sending their products around a lot of the areas of South London, which I thought was great. The many uses of flour are clear, and one of the most obvious is being distributed now, and I hope you had to taste it. The bread that's being handed around now is homemade with flour ground in Brixton Windmill, just down the road. Now, with access to our windmill, we could potentially have a consistent source of breads, pastry, pasta, and much more. And it could also be used as a thickener for sauces, stews, soup, making our meals that little bit more filling, and also providing us with vital micronutrients, which are important in an apocalypse. Now, there are also wider uses of flour that might come in handy in this post-apocalyptic world. Most notably, it could be used to make glue if it was mixed in the right quantities. An apocalypse is an ideal time to get creative and innovative, and being able to find dual purposes for our produce is a skill it's a skill that we need to learn if we're going to survive overall. Now, of course, we have the slight issue of how we may access wheat. They do grow some, but fortunately there are a number of other types of flour we can make using ingredients found in the local shops and supermarkets that can be milled and turned into flour. So corn, rice, chickpeas, almonds, oats, and even potatoes, which incidentally are grown, are incredibly hardy and provide a bountiful harvest, so they could also be ground down. Now, the presence of our own flour mill provides us with a near endless ability to produce and subsequently cook with a range of flours. Next, we have sausages and smoked salmon. And these are courtesy of London Smoke and Cure. Now, London Smoke and Cure was established in 2015 by Ross Mitchell, and they're an award-winning smokehouse based on Glenalden Mews, just off Streatham High Road. They smoke and sell a range of products from smoked salmon, bacon, sausage, and charcuterie meats. They also provide a range of smoke school workshops if anybody's interested in learning ahead of the apocalypse, including cooking classes, sausage making, and even classes in salami and bacon making. What you are trying here is their sashimi-grade smoked salmon and their hand-linked free-range sausages. Now, of course, in the event of an apocalypse, luxury items like smoked salmon might not be easy to come by, but they certainly won't be our priority. The smokehouse itself can certainly be of use to us. So the smoking of food is estimated to date all the way back some 3.3 million years ago. It's supposed that early humans would hang meat to dry and keep it out of the way of pests, as simple dwellings often didn't have chimneys. These structures would have become very smoky and the meat would smoke, helping to preserve it for longer periods of time. One of the key aspects of a post-apocalyptic survival is a return to ancient ways of living. So it's only right that we should return to this old, reliable means of preserving food. One of the things that Streatham most definitely lacks is wildlife. Being an urban area, we're unfortunately quite far from our local farm, but of course, we have numerous supermarkets, butcher shops, and a fair few fishmongers with a bounty of produce that, unless we can find a way to preserve, would go bad quite quickly into the apocalypse. So by utilising the smoker at London Smoke and Cure, we can preserve our foods, particularly our meats and our fish, enabling our resources to go further. Next to the fun stuff, beer. The beer's about to be handed around. Thank you. So the beer that you're going to be handed is from the Ink Spot Brewery, and it's to help wash down the bread and the smoked goods that you've just had. And it's one of the finest beers found on the planet, of course, because it was made in Streatham. It's brewed at the top of the rookery, and the Ink Spot Brewery was established in 2018, brewing unfiltered, unrefined, and vegan beers. They also do a mulberry sour special, which utilises mulberries from a mulberry tree found in Streatham Common. And their beers can be found in a number of pubs here in Streatham and across London. Now, let's be honest, although a nice cool pint might be the answer in a fair few scenarios, and in an apocalypse, it might certainly feel like a cold pint is a good response to what's happening. Beer does have many uses beyond being a social lubricant. So Men's Health lists around 31 alternative uses for beer. Amongst these are medicinal use, particularly found for an upset stomach, curing insomnia, lowering blood pressure, and passing kidney stones. An alternative to shampoo, and an alternative to shower gel, although I'm not sure about that one. But apparently it gets you clean. Additionally, the waste product produced in the brewing process has many uses, including turning into baked goods, who knew, treating wastewater, remember the importance of water in an apocalypse, and converting into a green energy source, as well as turning it into compost. Who knew beer had so many uses? And of course, if the worst does come to worst, we have an ample supply of beer to see us through the end of days. So next, we are going to go to some of our sauces. Now, you are being served these sauces with cheese because they are extremely hot. Please do not do double dipping. It's hot. It's hot. I love hot food, and I found it extremely, extremely hot. So please do approach with caution. Now, the South London Sauce Company, St. Streatham Sauce. Yeah. The South London Sauce Company makes sauces, rubs, chili jams, and seasoning in small batches in South London, including here in Streatham, where they produce this St. Streatham hot sauce, which provides a true taste of South London in the company's own words. Like Streatham herself, this sauce doesn't suffer fools. Now, the Heatroot beetroot sauce, though the business has now moved their offices to Oxford, why would anybody do that? The Heatroot beetroot sauce, the world's first, was originally invented, made, bottled, and distributed here in Streatham. Now, in truth, if truth be told, the use of hot sauces doesn't really span very far beyond making our various flour-based foods taste a little bit better, which after the 100th meal of bread and unseasoned smoked meats will certainly be welcomed during the apocalypse. But one of the more non-current uses of hot sauce, which will certainly come in handy, is a deterrent to ward off insects. Who knew? Eventually, we're going to have to start growing our own produce, and we're going to have loads of mouths to feed. So we're not going to be able to afford crops being spoiled by caterpillars, slugs, worms, or any other pests, and obviously all the factories are down. So a combination of hot sauce, dish soap, and water can fend off all of the insects and keep all of our produce pest-free. And it says no more food distributed here, so that's the end of that. I hope you enjoyed it. And so that's the end of the food that I have for you today. But it's not the end of what's available in Streatham. So, Downton Avenue honey. It used to be known as St. Streatham honey. Not many people would imagine that we have a local beehive. I think we've got two now here in busy Streatham, but we do. And one is on Downton Avenue, and they utilise the hard work of local Streatham Hill bees to produce some truly delicious honey. The health benefits of honey are numerous. Not only is it nutrient-rich and contains a large number of antioxidants, it can help regulate blood sugar and may also help prevent heart disease, helping us to keep a healthy population. And I have it on good authority that if you're a sufferer of hay fever like myself, some local honey is quite helpful to keep the sneezes down. So though its uses are not limited to consumption alone, honey can actually also be used to treat wounds and burns. Although I have to say, I'm going to tell you about why that happens, but please do not go around rubbing honey on your wounds and burns because there is not an apocalypse yet. If you are wounded or burnt, please see your doctor. So though we have a high proportion of medical professionals in our constituency, we have so many people from the NHS, and we're so grateful to all of them. We're going to have to be really innovative in the apocalypse about what we do in terms of health solutions. So topical honey treatment has been used to heal wounds and burns since ancient Egypt, and it's still relatively common practice today, although it shouldn't be common practice in Streatham, as I said, because we have many, many healthcare professionals. Its healing properties are likely to come from its antibacterial and anti-inflammatory effects, and can also be used to treat other skin conditions like psoriasis. So the presence of our own beehives here in Streatham means that whilst we may lack modern medical facilities during the apocalypse, we are going to have some basic resources needed to treat basic wounds and afflictions. Rootcraft. Now, Rootcraft, another local business, they offer organically grown culinary and medicinal herbs at very local rates. They grow and sell their herbs to people within a 2-mile radius of the Streatham area, and they can also often be found selling their produce in a local market at the Rookery. Now, these plants grown by Rootcraft are locally adapted to grow in our area, and they use microgreen and intensive small-scale marketing techniques and technology to grow in confined environments. This innovation and knowledge of growing produce in Streatham will provide invaluable expertise when we begin to grow and produce our own larger scale crops to feed our communities. Foraging. We may need to forage at some point. Now, Streatham Common has a wonderful wooded area that runs close to an underground spring, and that bursts with wild garlic. Who knew? And with the warmer weather in spring, you'll find beautiful shoots coming up. Now, I love garlic, and when researching this, I never realised that we could find some so close to home and naturally. And obviously, there are a number of allotments across the constituency, so you can definitely get a lot from there as well. Also in Streatham Common is an ancient mulberry tree, and it's thought to have been planted when the former Rookery House and its gardens were established in the late 1700s, the fruit of which can be eaten when it's ripe and turned into beer, as you may have sampled today. Now, Tooting Bec, there is technically just outside of our constituency, obviously because Streatham is going to be so great and the only place that's doing well, people are going to want to, join. It's going to go a bit further out. It's rumoured to have multiple points of access where watercress actually springs up spontaneously. We've got to make sure that we maintain these long-term food provisions and return to a thriving community. So once our basic needs are met, our next aim is not just to survive, but thrive. Like any good apocalypse movie, we must try and return to what makes us human, to becoming a functioning society once more. In order to achieve that, we must be able to establish an agricultural system so that we are no longer living hand to mouth. So we have to find suitable locations to farm. Fortunately for us, we already have several community gardens and allotments. No, that's not that one. Though this won't be enough to provide the quantities of food we need, it does mean that there are a number of people within the constituency who have a load of knowledge and have the demonstrable skills to grow crops. Actually, no, I think that was the right one. All we need is the space to upscale them, and fortunately, if you look at a map of Streatham, there are multiple patches of green, all of which could be repurposed as farmland if anybody fancied being a farmer. Now, I know for a fact there are a number of different types of produce that can be grown on a constituency, even Scotch bonnet peppers that I've had from a local allotment, and I know that we have people that have the skills to grow them. Does anybody have an allotment here? Does anybody grow anything edible in their garden? See, many, many more. There you go. So it will also at some point become critical that we're able to trade with other surviving communities for the resources that we need. So you've tasted some of the goods that we may be able to trade, but of course the key question is how can we travel? Because we need to set up some of these trade routes. Now, I know the unreliable train schedule has been a thorn in the side of many Streatham residents. Unfortunately for us, the railways will no longer be in the hands of Govia Thames Link Railway when the apocalypse comes. And I think there may be some people that might hope for an apocalypse just so that it's taken out of their hands anyway. But assuming the railway lines are not flooded, we actually have clear routes to a number of different areas and thus potential trade partners. The railway lines even give us access to the coast with a near direct route to the coast of Brighton. Now, I won't pretend to know much about how to work a train because I can't even drive. And unfortunately for us, I don't have to, because I know that we have several railway workers and engineers living in Streatham who'll be able to get our trains working again. And I do know, however, that we do have the Merchant Navy Pacific Clan Line steam train housed not too far away in Battersea. And the people in Battersea are going to be really hungry. So I'm quite sure that we could trade a whole load of our goods, get this steam train back. And some of you avid train spotters might have actually seen this steam train passing Streatham a couple of years ago. So if we can get to that and we can have control of our railways and control trade routes, we're in a really good position here in Streatham. If the railway lines are flooded, then at the very least this route could hopefully work as a canal. We can utilise it in that way. And of course, if the worst does occur and staying in Streatham is no longer viable, then as I said, we've got a direct route to the coast to escape the country. I'm nearly at my end, and it'd be interesting to hear some questions about what I've just said. That's it. There you have it. In the event of an apocalypse, Streatham has everything you need to survive and thrive. We have everything from shelter, water, food, and the means to return to community. At best, this evening you've heard a nearly foolproof plan on how we in Streatham can survive an apocalypse without ever having to leave the comfort of our beautiful constituency. At worst, you've heard some pretty interesting facts about the area and have had the opportunity to try some tasty produce that can be found here in Streatham. And Suzanne, hi Suzanne. Suzanne, that's the thing I handed you earlier. From my office can provide a reference sheet which outlines where in the constituency you can find all of these goods. And so the next time you watch a post-apocalyptic movie or show or thoughts on the end of the world cross your mind and you start to think about escape routes and the next steps for survival, don't rule out staying here in Streatham. It's obviously the best place in the world to be. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bill. That was absolutely terrific. We will have, if you want to ask some people want to ask questions, they can. But you can still have a cup of tea and some wine after, if you're mingling around afterwards. Is there anything else you want to tell us? That was absolutely wonderful. I loved it.
No. Any other ideas for the apocalypse would be greatly appreciated. But I do hope that you do look into a lot of the local produce that we do have in Streatham. We have some fantastic businesses here that are not only sustainable but do amazing work and produce some amazing products and are part of the reason that Streatham is great as much as its people are. And one of the reasons I do truly think we survive because we have a lot of great people in this constituency with a lot of great skills. And I'm sure many of you are amongst them, especially with your fantastic gardens that grow things that we can actually eat. I really want to have a go on this steam train, if anybody has.
Yes, I love steam trains.
So if there are any questions, I'm happy for anything as random as what I've just said.
Well, I'm sure if people are going to have a cup of tea or some wine, they can also have a milling about, so it's okay.
Hi. I just wondered, in the event of an apocalypse, whether you think the authorities would still extend the ULEZ zone to the M25.
I was expecting to be asked a traffic question. So in the event of an apocalypse, obviously all of the petrol stations have been run dry. So the only way in which you'd be able to drive is if you had a solar-powered car. I'm not sure many have been. Oh, there is one Tesla solar-powered car. It has not made its way to Streatham yet. There will be no traffic restrictions of any sort because we'll be going by steam train and horse and cart.
Yeah. I have an allotment at Norbury Park, which is on our fringes. What is interesting is that the callaloo that grows wild there has virtually colonized all of the allotments.
Oh, and that's a bad thing, isn't it?
And the other thing is, of course, Scotch bonnet that grows in the greenhouse.
Sorry, what did you say about Scotch bonnets?
In the greenhouse.
In the greenhouse. I've seen many greenhouses in Streatham because Streatham is great.
I mean, if you're interested, this is nothing new because during the war, all the commons were converted to grow vegetables. And you can still see in the overhead pictures from the 50s still show the allotments in Streatham Common, Norbury Grove, Tooting Common. So nothing new.
Nothing new, you see. We've been here before. Not quite here, but...
That was great. I wondered how we're going to help the displaced population from the centre of London.
So, of course, Streatham is full of welcoming people. We are always accepting of refugees. Somebody asked me how I was going to answer a defence question from quite selfish people that might want to take over. However, I think that in this area we have such a huge welcoming spirit, and that anybody who is willing to come and contribute to our community would be more than welcome to come. And as I said, because we're so great, we'd probably stretch out a bit more, especially up into the hills of Crystal Palace.
I am an avid fan of The Good Life from the 1970s. You remember Felicity Kendall and Penelope Keith? So I'm doing a few sums in my head here. I think that the available space in Streatham for growing produce is possibly something in the order of, let's say, 5,000 acres. And it takes about half an acre minimum per person for subsistence living, intensively gardened. So that's maybe 10,000 people. The population of Streatham is currently 58,000. What are we going to do with the other 48,000?
That is a very, very good question. And as I said, and do you mean Streatham proper or Streatham the constituency? Because I'm talking about Streatham of the constituency, which comprises no less than 4 commons, because we actually have part of Brockwell Park, we have Clapham Common, we have Streatham Common.
Hello, I wanted to ask.
So I think we have more space than we think we do. We may push out a bit further, but other than that, the steam trains are really going to help, or the canals, whichever comes in place.
I just wanted to ask about the River Effra and the Wandle. Talking about flooding or anything else, because I'm sure one of the reasons we were told that the Brixton Tube couldn't extend to Streatham was because of the Effra. Yeah. And I mean, you can still see the Wandle, and I know it did flood about 100 years ago or something. I was just wondering about that. And there's other rivers, aren't there, in London that were covered up, tributaries and that. And I just wondered the effect of that with, talking about flooding and...
Well, you're absolutely right about that. That would have a massive impact. But because Streatham is actually, I never realised how high up it was. Obviously, it's not massively high, but it's high up enough that if there were no flood defences, which we do have, just so that everybody knows, we do have flood defences. They are in operational order. That if we didn't have flood defences, we'd still be a significant amount of feet above sea level. So we'd actually be okay, even with these particular rivers in place. And they would, and who knew? I mean, I was fascinated to find out about beer. being used as a sewage treating source. I mean, it's amazing. People are going to start drinking more beer now. But I think things like that are really important in terms of making sure that we do have those water sources, but also that we're not flooded by them, because we are in such a good position in Streatham, because it's great.
This isn't a question actually, but just a response to the acreage comment, which I thought was brilliant. You can actually grow things vertically now, so we've got quite a lot of walls.
We
So I
can
think
grow
we're
things
fine.
vertically now. Thank you.
I think that's it then for everybody, but thank you again, Belle.
Thank
It
you
was
very
really,
much.
really
I
lovely.
really enjoyed putting that together.
Can I just remind people that our next meeting is on the 7th of March, and it's the life and work of Charles Posey, which I'm really looking forward to. So please come along.